President Reagan, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's the sort I would have loved at the beginning of every election campaign. It is an honor and a joy to be with you to celebrate the 44th anniversary of your 39th birthday. I hope to be here to celebrate the 51st anniversary of the same birthday. Indeed, if you were thinking of running again to see us into the 21st century, I'd be even better pleased. I note, President Reagan, from one of your books, that in 1987, you heard one presidential candidate say that what this country needed was a president for the 90s. You were set to run again because you thought, he said, a president in his 90s. And you were... Well, for us, hope springs eternal. All it needs is to repeal the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Sir, you strode into our midst at a time when America needed you most. This great country had been through a period of national malaise, bereft of any sense of moral direction. Through it all, throughout 8 of the fastest moving years in memory, you were unflappable and unyielding. You brushed off the jibes and jabs of your jealous critics. With that Irish twinkle and that easy homespun style which never changed, you brought a new assurance to America. You are not only America's president, important as that is, you were a great leader. In a time of average men, you stood taller than anyone else. With a toughness unseen for a long time, you stood face to face with the evil empire. And with an unexpected diplomacy, which confused your foes and even some of your friends, you reached out to that empire, perhaps no longer evil, but still formidable. You met its leaders on their turf, but on your terms. In a time of politicians, you proved yourself a statesman. And that leadership, that faith in freedom and enterprise, brought about a renewal of this great country. America was back, and the free world became a safer place. It was not only that you were a great communicator, and you were the greatest, but that you had a message to communicate. The message that had inspired the founding fathers, the message that has guided this nation from its birth. The essence of good government is to blend the wisdom of the ages with the circumstances of contemporary times. And that is what you did. Not since Lincoln or Winston Churchill in Britain has there been a president who has so understood the power of words to uplift and to inspire. You reached beyond partisanship to principles, beyond our own selves to our very souls. You reached for and touched, as Lincoln had said so long before you, the better angels of our nature. Leadership is more than budgets and balance sheets, more than the policy of public measures. It is a matter of moral purpose. And that moral realm is reached by that insight and rhetoric of which only the truly great are capable. This political instinct of truth, conviction, and patriotism began long before you were president. I have been reading that excellent book of your speeches, Ron. And I'm going to refer to 3 speeches in particular. In 1969, as governor of California, you spoke at Eisenhower College. It was a terrible time of student rebellion, of violence against property, violence against fellow students, and violence against others on the campus. How and when did all this begin, you asked? It began, you said, the first time someone old enough to know better declared it was no crime to break the law in the name of social protest. It began with those who, in the name of change or progress, decided they could scrap all the time-tested wisdom man has accumulated in his climb from the swamp to the stars. And I particularly liked the next bit. St. Thomas Aquinas warned teachers that they must never dig a ditch in front of a student that they failed to fill in. To clearly raise doubts and to ever seek and never find is to be in opposition to education and progress. You were right and said so fearlessly where some academics just compromised. And my second choice arises because we are coming to the 50th anniversary of the D-Day Normandy landings, the longest day, the day we dare not lose the battle. Let us recall what you said on the 40th anniversary on those beaches, for no one else could say it better. You said, those men of Normandy had faith that what they were doing was right. Faith that they fought for all humanity. Faith that a just God would grant them mercy on this beachhead or on the next. The Americans who fought here that morning, you continued, knew word of the invasion was spreading through the darkness back home. They felt in their hearts that in Georgia they were filling the churches at 4 a.m. in the morning. In Kansas they were kneeling on their porches and praying. And in Philadelphia they were ringing the Liberty Bell. And they knew that God was an ally in this great cause. That night, General Ridgway was listening in the darkness for the promise God made to Joshua. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. And you said, let us continue to stand for the ideals for which they lived and died. We will always remember. We will always be proud. Ron, I think that was your greatest speech. Like Winston Churchill, You made words fight like soldiers and lifted the spirit of a nation. And my third one, also a favorite, which was seen the world over, was the terrible Challenger space shuttle disaster. You knew immediately with that unfailing instinct that the tragedy needed a national voice to share the mourning, to comfort, and yet to say, the quest must go on. You were on television within hours. And I remember so well, you spoke especially to the school children who had been watching. You said, I know it is hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future and will continue to follow them. And of course America did, as we saw today. And the memorable last words you used came from a poem which linked you all so much to Britain, because that poem was written by a young fighter pilot killed in the skies over Britain shortly before his death in 1941 at the age of 19. You will know them. They're your favorite, and they're mine. I slipped the surly bonds of earth, put out my hand, and touched the face of God. You always had the right words, and we honor you for it. There are so many other speeches, some prophetic, some humorous, but all with a vision, all which inspired. We could identify with each and every one. More than anyone else, you knew people's desire to be attached to some cause greater than themselves. So instead of inundating the American people with a torrent of projections and percentages, you spoke of the voluntary spirit, of community and charity. When others spoke of the fear of war, you spoke of the need for warriors and peace through strength. When others bewailed the failure of big government to provide for the collective good, you spoke of self-reliance, of personal responsibility, of individual pride and integrity. When others demanded compromise, you, Ronald Reagan, preached conviction. Your 8 presidential years, so ably supported by Nancy, to whom we also do honor. They were more than a 2-term presidency. Under your guidance, right made might, and it triumphed. And there was a new birth of freedom, extending far beyond these shores. On this, your birthday, Ron, we offer you our undiminished gratitude and boundless affection. May God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank all of you very much. I haven't heard such cheers since I told the Washington Press Corps I was leaving town. I don't know who cheered the loudest, them or me. Frankly, for a minute there, I was a bit concerned that after all these years away from Washington, you all wouldn't recognize me. Heck, pretty soon I'm going to have to get one of those credit cards with my picture on the front. I can't tell you how thrilled Nancy and I are to be here with you tonight to celebrate, as Margaret said, the 44th anniversary of my 39th birthday. Haley told me he was going to gather a few friends for dinner tonight, but I had no idea. Before I get started here, I want to thank my dear friend Margaret Thatcher for being part of yet another important milestone. Another important milestone in my life, and for those very kind words. As most of you know, Margaret and I go back quite a ways. We met at a time before she became Prime Minister and I became President. From the moment we met, we discovered that we shared quite similar views of government and freedom. Margaret ended our first meeting by telling me we must stand together. And that's exactly what we've done in the years since. As friends, and as political allies. Margaret Thatcher is one of the giants of our century. Her many achievements will be appreciated more and more as time goes on and history is written. For me, she has been a staunch ally, my political soulmate, a great visionary, and a dear, dear friend. Thank you, Margaret, for being with us tonight. I would also like to convey my personal appreciation to Haley Barbour. Haley, you and the entire Republican National Committee are doing an excellent job keeping the heat on the Democrats at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Haley, back when I hired you to work on my White House staff, I suspected you might amount to something someday. I must say that returning to Washington today really brought back memories. As our plane headed toward the airport, I looked down on the White House, and it was just like the good old days. The Rose Garden, the South Lawn, David Gergen. I looked over a couple of blocks, and there was the Internal Revenue Service, bigger than I ever remembered it. Then I looked down at the enormous United States Post Office building. I could just see the excitement on the faces of the bureaucrats knowing they would soon be managing our national health care system. Up on Capitol Hill, I saw that big white dome bulging with new tax revenues. I instinctively reached for my veto pen and thought to myself, go ahead, make my day. You may have seen President Clinton draw his own veto pen on television just last week. The difference is that his pen doesn't have any ink in it. Unless, of course, you're talking about red ink. And we all know the Democrats have plenty of that. All of you have made our day just by being here. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and those who work so hard for the grand old party, which reminds me, I need to set the record straight once and for all on a certain matter that keeps coming up. I have to admit, I'm very flattered by all the telephone calls, the letters, the signs, and especially those bumper stickers. But with all I've got going in my life right now, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to run again for president in 1996. However, I have not ruled out the possibility of running in the year 2000. I hesitate to ask, but if I did run, could I count on you again for your support? Seriously, birthdays often serve as the rare moments when we can pause from the bustle of our daily lives to reflect on the years that have passed, the accomplishments and people that have made them special. As I look around this gathering, I am filled with countless warm and fond memories. Many of you go back with us as far as my 2 terms as California governor. Others of you are more recent additions to the family. Regardless of when you came, you have been a big part of our lives. For that, we are so grateful and feel so blessed. Now, as most of you know, I'm not one for looking back. I figure there will be plenty of time for that when I get old. But rather, what I take from the past is inspiration for the future. And what we accomplished during our years in the White House must never be lost amid the rhetoric of political revisionists. When we came to Washington on that bright sunny day in January of 1981, we shared a dream for America. Back then, the reach of government had become intolerable. It was a time of rampant inflation and crushing interest rates when hope was scarce. It was a time when cold, ugly walls divided nations and human rights were trampled in the name of evil and corrupt ideologies. It was a time when the nuclear arms race was spiraling out of control and a blinding mistrust stood between East and West. We believed that for the future of America and the free world, this could not stand. And together, we insisted that this great nation must once again behave as such. In our America, most people still believed in the power of a better tomorrow. So together, we got the government off the backs of the American people. We created millions of new jobs for Americans at all income levels. We cut taxes and freed the people from the shackles of too much government. And the economy burst loose in the longest peacetime expansion ever. We brought America back bigger and better than ever. It was a time when America was a bright beacon of hope and freedom to oppressed people everywhere. The world looked to us not just because of our military might, but because of our ideas of liberty and freedom. And they knew we were willing to defend and promote those ideas in every corner of the earth. We rebuilt a demoralized, underfunded, and unappreciated military. And we made it the most modern and respected force in the world. And who can forget those so-called experts who said our military buildup threatened a dangerous escalation of tensions? What kind of fool, they asked, would call the Soviet Union an evil empire? I'm tempted to say there's no fool like an old fool. But as events have shown, there was nothing foolish in my prediction that communism was destined for the ash heap of history. After decades of struggle and with the help of the bold leadership of Margaret Thatcher, democracy won the Cold War, and the Berlin Wall came tumbling down. The world watched with amazement as we put our house in order and took our rightful place as the most dynamic country in the world. And I firmly believe that history will record our era as one of peace and global prosperity. However, our task is far from over. Our friends in the other party will never forgive us for our success and are doing everything in their power to rewrite history. Listening to the liberals, you'd think that the 1980s were the worst period since the Great Depression, filled with suffering and despair. I don't know about you, but I'm getting awfully tired of the whining voices from the White House these days. They were claiming there was a decade of greed and neglect. Well, you and I know better than that. We were there. Although the political landscape has changed, the bold ideas of the 1980s are alive and well. Republican candidates swept every major election across the country last year, from New York to Texas, from New Jersey to my home state of California. And as a result, it seems that our opponents have finally realized how unpopular liberalism really is. So now they're trying to dress their liberal agenda in a conservative overcoat. After watching the State of the Union address the other night, I'm reminded of the old adage that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Only in this case, it's not flattery, but grand larceny. The intellectual theft of ideas that you and I recognize as our own. Speech delivery counts for little on the world stage unless you have convictions and, yes, the vision to see beyond the front row seats. The Democrats may remember their lines, but how quickly they forget the lessons of the past. I have witnessed 5 major wars in my lifetime, and I know how swiftly storm clouds can gather on a peaceful horizon. The next time a Saddam Hussein takes over Kuwait or North Korea brandishes a nuclear weapon, will we be ready to respond? In the end, it all comes down to leadership, and that is what this country is looking for now. It was leadership here at home that gave us strong American influence abroad and the collapse of imperial communism. Great nations have responsibilities to lead, and we should always be cautious of those who would lower our profile because they might just wind up lowering our flag. I don't think an event of this kind would be complete without, well, something that you probably got used to during my days in Washington. One of my stories. It's a story about a woman who walked into a bridal shop one day and told the sales clerk that she was looking for a wedding gown for her 4th wedding. Well, the saleswoman asked, just exactly what type of dress are you looking for? A long, flowing white dress with a veil, she responded with assurance. Not totally convinced, but afraid to offend the woman, the saleslady said, you know, dresses of that nature are usually more appropriate for brides who are being married for the first time, for those a bit more innocent, if you know what I mean. Well, the lady retorted and put her hand on her hip. I do know what you mean, and I can assure you I'm as innocent as the rest of them. Despite all my marriages, I remain as innocent as any first-time bride. Well, you see, my first husband was a dear, sweet man. It was a terrible tragedy, actually. All the excitement of the wedding was simply too much for him, and he died as we checked into the hotel on our wedding night. I'm sorry to hear that, said the clerk, but what about the others? Well, my second husband and I got into a terrible fight in the limousine on the way to our wedding reception. We haven't spoken since and got the marriage quickly annulled. What about your third husband? Asked the store clerk. Well, the woman replied, he was a Democrat. And every night for 4 years, he just sat on the edge of the bed and told me how good it was going to be. Sorry, I just couldn't resist telling you. My friends, on a serious note, I would like to end by telling you something that Nancy and I have wanted to say to you for a long time. During our years together, here, as you know, things were always on the move. As soon as we accomplished one objective, we were quick on to the next. There was rarely time to celebrate victory or recall all the people who made it possible. Well, one of the benefits of retirement is you get a chance to reflect back over the years. Since Nancy and I have returned to California, we've spent many occasions looking back at what we did here and remembering the extraordinary people who worked so hard to make those great days possible. And we wondered if we would ever get the chance to thank them. Well, you are those people, those great individuals who gave so much of yourselves, who sacrificed and supported us and helped us achieve everything we did. So I will conclude tonight by saying the greatest gift I could receive on my birthday is to be able to stand before each and every one of you and convey in the only words I can how grateful Nancy and I are. Thank you for being there and for being here. And thank you for making this evening a memory I will cherish forever. And until we meet again, God bless you, my friends.